Hello, 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 and welcome back, my friends, to another episode of The Shadow Side with Safrianna. We're in the thick of the shadow side of the world right now, my friends. And as always, I am happy to be here having conversations about the hard stuff, the uncomfortable stuff, the stuff that we really need to talk about. And today I'm delighted to have my friend Dāli here with me to have a conversation about standing up to bullies, which good Lord, what a timely conversation. Dāli, thank you so
Uh,
much for being here. If you would be so kind as to introduce yourself.
yeah, thank you so much for having me, Safriana. My name is Dali. I became a parenting coach, but I specialize in the space of bullying awareness and prevention because it happens. It happens all the time. It happens as early as Head Start,
Mhm,
and it can be very life altering. And I think that
mhm.
we still do not talk enough about it. And there's a mental health epidemic going on, and part of it is because of bullying. We're not teaching kids on how to cope, how to avoid it, how to get help and all of that good stuff. So that's why I'm here.
Yes, and
Mhm.
I am hoping you can give us some really practical tools today because it is such a problem. And, I want to just frame our conversation as we go into this. So, just in case you don't know me, I'm Safriana Luna, the Queer Spirit Guide, and I'm a trauma therapist and an author and a CEO and a lot of creative things. And my most recent re-release, this is literally the promo copy I have in my hand, or the like test copy. But I wrote an essay on the current state of the world, and it starts, things look bleak, friends. The bullies and the abusers are openly calling the shots now. And so that's what we see
Mhm.
happening, literally. And how do we begin to stand up against that when it's at such a large level? How do we help on the local level? So let's just kind of jump in there. Like,
Mhm.
you are a person who goes out and you do education, you talk about these things. So, how do we begin to influence the bullying behaviors at a
Ooh,
local?
that is such a big question. There's so many things that just popped into my head. I'm just gonna spit them out, but I'm gonna like go back. So first of all, be an upstander, not a bystander. Advocate for yourself, because advocating for yourself is advocating for everybody else as well. And always just use the power of your voice by reaching out to the people who have authority, the people who can make change at a higher, more impactful level. But it all starts also with knowledge, like knowing what bullying looks like, what abuse looks like, because bullying is a form of abuse, and a lot of people don't see it that way, which is incredibly
Mm,
weird. And there's so many levels of it too, right? So I always I used to tell people, I started this back in 2017. It really was before that, but in 2017 is when I created my organization and created the Diversity and Anti-Bullying Academy. One of the things that I used to tell parents, so I have a big group of parent, and they were like, "Well, what's the big deal?" And um, what are the effects? And I said, "Well, think about it. When you have a child who is being bullied all the time, and there's nobody there to step in and help them, they feel like, wow, I'm not worth standing up for.
mm,
You know, some of them are very bold children who can defend themselves. And I admire that. And I don't know if that's something that they can innately do or it's something that you learn. I think there's a little bit of both, right? I have a specific person in mind that I always think of, and I always think, wow, if I could have only been like that person as a kid, I wouldn't have gone through my own bullying,
mm.
experiences. And to people like this person I'm thinking they're just very quick on their feet to think about how to defend themselves, what to say, or to not care.
Mhm.
And that's what's so important, especially when you're children, or when you're kids, right? That you care about what others think of you and how they see you, and you want to be liked. So what we're not doing is, as parents or as a society, is that we're not teaching kids about self love from an early age. And we're not teaching them that to question authority is not to disrespect authority, it's just questioning authority, which I know, like in the Latino community, just like many others, when you question an elder, you are scolded. It's like a big no no, but that has led to so much bullying and other forms of abuse. So, teaching people about all these little tiny cultural or just family habits that happen in the home or outside of the home is really really important. And also like teaching them to set boundaries of all sorts. Like one that I wish I would have learned, just to say no to people. Like, no, I
Mhm.
don't like that. And you don't even have to be mean. I was like, no, I don't like that. Or like nowadays, I can't FaceTime right now, or all the time.
Mhm.
I need to sleep. Bye. Just something so simple. Or like, I don't like jokes about my family or my body or my culture. Please stop. Like
Right.
these are concrete examples that we need to provide, because it starts so tiny. And I remember telling people, look, somebody gets bullied, nobody stands up for them. They feel bad about themselves. Eventually, as it continues, then the bully thinks, I've got all the power. I can do this. Nobody's going to stop me. And they continue to hurt other people. And then this person who was once bright now is scared to go to school. They're missing a lot of school. Grades go down. They try to catch up, and because some things build on themselves. So like math, right? If you miss several weeks of math and you just try to jump back in, it's really hard to catch up. So then the person starts thinking, "Dang, I must be dumb." Confidence keeps going down. They try to continue to catch up, and they're still experiencing bullying. And this is just snowballing. And then,
Mhm.
so now my grades are low. I really wanted to go to college, become an astronaut or an engineer or whatever. But now my grades are low, so maybe I'll just settle for community college or just get a job. And then when you start lowering those expectations for yourself, you start thinking, well, nobody's going to really want me because I'm a dumb person. Oh, these people are getting the degrees. So now if I want a partner, I'm kind of like not good enough for them, right?
Mm.
And then that leads to opening for others to abuse you, to mistreat you because you think that you're not good enough. So people might think that I'm exaggerating, but this happens all the time.
All the
It's
time.
happening now. And then the bully just continues. And it's true, bullies do thrive in the workforce because they're bullying their way through. They're, they're doing certain things. and and sadly, they can lead nations and cause havoc and destroy
Absolute havoc.
lives, take away freedoms. And you know society is too complacent. I think it's too scared, and maybe they just need more concrete examples about the micro habits that lead to these bigger issues. So when people say bullying is just kids being soft, I think that they don't really understand, number one, that not everybody knows how to deal with issues like bullying. Not everybody has the support system, which is super important.
Mhm.
And not everybody is fearless to do something so simple like saying no. I mean, I look back now about how I used to be as a child versus now, and it is night and day. I was so afraid to say anything.
Yep.
And and especially when you grow up in a household where you see the ramifications of speaking up, they don't have to tell you don't speak up. You just watch what happens, which is sometimes not good. And so you're quiet because you're like, oh, I know what's going to happen if I say something.
Mm.
So anyway, I'm going to stop there because I got really heavy really fast
No,
into it.
no, that's exactly, this is the shadow side for a reason. And it's we have to talk about these things, and no, everything that you said is so valid. I, come from this background as a trauma therapist, and all of this is generational trauma that's, this macro big level that's then being perpetuated on a micro level, like in the family systems and in societal systems. And, I loved what you said about how our self advocacy advocates for everyone else, and that we have to learn self love because we're not taught it. Because
Hmm.
when we have self love, I love this image of, like, if I only love myself 30%, right? If I was bullied as a kid, which I was as well,
Hmm.
and those narratives get stuck in your head and they loop and they play, and it diminishes your worth over time. So if you're running around and you're like, I only love myself 30%,
Mhm.
I hate the other 70% of me. And then someone comes along and they act like they love you at 40%. You're like, that's an
Mm.
improvement, but
Mhm.
it's still probably highly toxic and abusive and harmful.
Mhm. Yeah.
And we have to call it what it is, right? Like bullying is often verbal and emotional abuse, if not escalating into physical abuse or threats or other very scary things.
Right.
And I want to say, even if I'm using air quotes here, even if it's quote, just emotional, verbal bullying and abuse, that still has a massive impact. It doesn't have to escalate into physical harm and
Yeah.
violence. The verbal, mental violence is enough. So,
Mhm.
uh,
And that's sometimes worse because a bruise can heal, but that emotional damage can last forever. I have spoken to older people. I remember this 84-year-old man who was crying as he was telling
mm,
me that when he was in high school, he was, bullied because of his weight, and he still carried that at 84. You
mhm,
know, there have been moms that have spoken to me, and something happens to their children, and they're triggered because something happened to them.
mhm.
So it is not something to take lightly. And now we have cyberbullying. That's a whole nother game changer. That's just um, something that people think you can just put a phone away.
Mhm.
And yeah, to a certain point you can, but the reality is, if it's not a phone, you have to go online nowadays for everything, for banking, for homework, for navigation, for all sorts of things.
Yep.
And cyberbullies really know how to get to somebody. And then there's leaks of private data, and so they can harass you in person, online, and they can destroy lives, and they have. And so, digital citizenship is something that also needs to be talked about. And one of the easiest examples I can give is when we are scrolling through social media and say, I'm going to use this example because I see it a lot. Somebody says something negative about the Kardashians. I'm not a fan of the Kardashians at all. And I see a lot of horrible, mean things. I don't know them as people.
Mhm.
And I know celebrities have their personal life and their celebrity life that we see. I don't know them. And I see some horrible stuff. I'm not gonna lie, I laugh at some of the stuff privately, but I'm not going to click like on that, because the moment I click like, I am telling everybody this is okay to do publicly. Like, we have to be realistic. We do things like that privately. It's different though when you say it directly
Mhm.
to the person or act on it. Um,
Right.
and and it's like, if you had that person in front of you, would you say that to their face? And if the answer is no, then don't do it. If you would not say that in front of your most cherished people in your life, your parents, your spouse, your kids, don't do it, because that is contributing to cyberbullying, maybe in
Mhm.
a small way. But think about the reaction, how the person behind that screen receiving that feels. That's horrible. If you
Yeah.
don't like the minimal criticism from your own family members, then cut it out. Don't be part of the problem. Be part of the solution.
Well, and even just like the cyberbullying, this like micro piece of you're scrolling, you like something, and then I see that you've liked that.
Yeah.
Now you're maybe not a safe person for me if
Hmm.
you're, so it literally, any kind of being the bystander or like egging things on of that nature perpetuates this problem. It digs it in and
Hmm.
normalizes it even more. And so that's, I want to go back to that. Like, we talked about support systems, right? Some people have really good support systems that they can say this thing's happening, it feels really bad, and someone steps in and intervenes and helps.
Hmm.
In many systems, that's not even possible. People
Yeah.
try to step in and intervene and help, right? Like, I was a public school teacher for a while and I saw kids get bullied, and I would try to take it to guidance or take it to the administration, and just nothing would be done.
Hmm.
And then you also layer in culture. I want to be really nuanced here, because here's the thing. I would argue most cultures normalize some form of bullying and abuse, talking down to like there's some normalizing of that. And yet all of these different cultures point fingers at all the other cultures for doing it while they themselves are doing it. So it's like ingrained on practically every level everywhere.
I agree.
So
Mhm.
when the support systems of our own communities and cultures are normalizing this, where do we go from there? So I guess that comes back to self advocacy, but how do you approach that in a community where it's normalized?
It starts at home. It starts at home, and it is not something that we're going to ever get rid of. Some people think that because I advocate for bullying awareness and prevention, that I'm trying to eradicate it completely. That is unrealistic. I
We
wish,
wish, right?
yeah, I wish it were true. But even if every single like educator did it, if most of the world was on board with it, there's always going to be some dumbass person that's going to feel entitled to say something horrible to another person, harass them because of their insecurities or their anger. And a lot of it comes from the lack of social emotional intelligence,
Mm-mm.
which is an emotional regulation. And so for the last 10-15 years, I've noticed a big shift in schools where they're focusing on the whole child, meaning like the mental, the not just the academic, but the physical, the mental, the emotional aspect of the child. Some people are really pissed about this because they feel like it is not a school's job to do this.
Mm.
But if they're out of school most of the day, then you're gonna have to deal with these kids. And a lot of the issues that teachers, and you know this because you were a teacher, a lot of these issues are not academic. A lot of them
Right.
are emotional and mental. So
Yep.
you as a teacher, you got to help yourself. Parents need to help you by helping their children learn how to process these emotions, how to deal with anger, how to resolve conflicts. These are all things that I think kids are not learning as much, or at least the way that you and I might have, uh, learned to do, because kids are not outside having conflicts with kids like we used to. Like fighting over the ball, or like, when you're racing bikes and you hurt yourself, and how do you deal with that? Do you like ball up and cry in front of your friends, or do you try to suck it in because you're like, oh, I'm with my friends, I can't be a punk bitch right now, like
We're
like
missing a lot of that stuff. Yeah.
yes, like they don't also like critical thinking. Like some kids don't see the abuse, they just they're very linear sometimes.
Hmm.
And part of the reason is also because we're not having conversations like we used to with children. um and it sounds like it's so much work, but really when it comes down to it, it's really just having conversations with kids and using what they like. One of the best examples that I like to give parents is use what they're watching as an example, because you will find in every TV show, in every song, you will find some sort of conflict. So let's talk about these lyrics. Let's talk about this television show, this cartoon, this animation. Shoot, Marvel movies alone is such a huge example of like bullying and like discrimination, but also love and how to regulate your emotions. Like I always think of like that scene when Black Widow is talking to I think it's no, it's Thor and behind the glass. No, no, not Thor. I can't even remember who it was. But Black Widow's like being manipulated, by the person in the glass cage or whatever. And he's just saying these horrible, horrible things to her. And she like pretends like she's breaking, but then she gets the information that she wants out of him, and then she walks away and it's like, thank you, and she smiles. Or like, that's hell of emotional regulation. And I know this is just a movie and she's a spy and all that. But my point is,
Life lessons, though.
yes, my point is, it is so cool and powerful to be able to not let somebody's super hurtful words get to the core of your soul and heart.
Hmm.
And it is something that you can do, you can learn. Would-
Yeah.
Mhm.
but it takes a lot of effort, and I know, from my own studies in mental health, that the negative things that we hear, are really, like, they're really ingrained into our brain. They work these little pathways in there that want to run those cycles so that we'll stay safe in the future, and we'll avoid something that will elicit that kind of comment or, mean gesture from someone else in the future.
Hmm.
But when we do allow that to happen and we start to mentally bully ourselves and repeat the narratives, what
Hmm.
what we've actually seen is that that stimulates the same parts of the brain and the body and the nervous system as if that outside person were bullying us again. So
Yeah.
when we keep running those stories, we're bullying ourselves over and over and over and over and
Hmm.
over and over. And it's just as impactful. So it can, by that same theory and token, be just as impactful to build ourselves up
Hmm.
and practice that self-love. So
Yeah.
what are some of the things that you would teach or offer when you see, parents or kids or whoever really struggling with that self-worth after, the bullies have gotten into their heads?
So one of the things that I always tell parents is, as soon as you learn that your child has been bullied, the first thing you want to say is, I'm sorry that this happened to you. You don't deserve it. Even if your child said something to that bully that the bully might not have liked, like, um, I don't know, like, you're stupid for saying that to me or anything like that, you know? It's like, don't put blame. Don't ask, oh, what did you do?
Mhm.
It's kind of like, SA victims, they're asked, well, what were you wearing? What did you do? Where were you? What time was it? Was it dark? It's like, no,
Mhm.
you're now shifting that blame to the victim, and that's wrong. Instead, um, you tell them, he's like, I love you. You didn't deserve this. I'm sorry this happened. How can I help? Because sometimes children know the answer to that, but they just need support, and they kind of need a sounding board. And they might share, well, this is what I think I should do, because they know the bully better than you do. You're not at school with them. So trust your child and hear them out. If you have some feedback to provide, ask them, like, can I give you my opinion? Give your opinion respectfully. Don't be pushy. Let them handle it. That is part of you teaching them conflict resolution. You don't have to say, I'm going to teach you conflict resolution. No, you just tell them, like, okay, so what do you want to do about it? And okay, let's think about the pros and cons about approaching this in this way. You're
Mm.
teaching them and you're giving them the power, and that feels so good to a child who has just been victimized. And then you want to focus on the solution, as far as like how they're going to get over this. And statistically, children who have at least one person who supports them, um, is able to come out on the other side. Just one person. It can be a friend, it can be a person of influence, like their favorite aunt or uncle, a
Mhm.
cousin, their parent, a faith leader, just somebody who they look up to, they admire, who they trust. And so if that person is not you, because let's be honest, some of us parents, might not have a really great relationship with our kids, but you still care. Maybe something's going on. Maybe you're grieving a death and you're just not able to communicate well. So if there is somebody in the family that you trust, go to that person and say, "Hey, this happened to my son, my daughter, and I know that they trust you very much. Do you mind just giving them, some words of wisdom or some comfort?" And make sure that you trust that person, and make sure
Yeah.
that that your child also trusts that person. And so there's so many ways to do it. And of course, mental health specialists, professionals, there's no shame in that. And I think a lot of parents still worry about their child going to a mental health professional, because they still don't understand what the role is or what their job or how it works. And
Mhm.
I always tell people, is like, they're not there to tell you how to feel. They're there to help you get out what you need to get out. Like, there's so many different modalities. So that's the other thing too, that, I mean, overall, I know I'm saying all this stuff, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of learning, but that's what it takes to survive life. That's
Right.
what it takes, whether it's right now with your child going through bullying, or whether it's you in a breakup or a conflict with a family member or death in the family. You're gonna have to learn all these skills anyway. So
Mhm.
don't think about, oh, this is unrealistic or I can't afford it. Where there is will, There is a way.
Yeah.
There's so many resources, and it might take you a while. But if you start asking around, especially the people who care about you, they'll find a way to help you out. And so just make sure that you ask them, how do you want me to help? And
That is
yeah.
key, that
Hmm.
consent piece, you know, everything
Hmm.
that you just said is so relevant to adult conflict relationships as well, and when somebody comes forward about something, I'll never forget, was banned off of my Facebook about a year ago now and got it back, but that's a whole long story. But when I got banned, I messaged someone and their first response was, "Well, what did you do?" And that that stuck with me so
Hmm.
awfully because I am not I would figure a person that knew me would know that I wouldn't do anything that would
Exactly.
lead me to get banned, and
Yeah.
so we have to really think about, especially with kids, how
Hmm.
we're wording things, that we're not putting blame on somebody in an unfortunate situation, that we hear their perspective, we offer them emotional validation, and then really, really ask, "What can I do?
Hmm.
What
Yeah.
can I specifically do to help you?" That empowerment piece is
Right.
so important.
And there's so many other ways that you can build up confidence, because I think that confidence overall is the key. It's not the only thing, but it's, I think, key. Um,
Mhm.
One of the fundamental things that you can teach your child to be able to overcome a lot of challenges in life. So I wrote a book with my friend. It's called Confident Bullyproof Kids. And what I did in there is that I provided some scenarios and also some prompts. And I did the prompts because I know that sometimes these kids and parents can't find the words to articulate what they really want. And I know
Mhm.
that to some people it sounds ridiculous, but there are people who are just, they need it, and there's no
Yep.
shame in it. So, I mean, sample scripts like on page 42, I was like, Mom, I need your help. Someone is hurt. That's if your child comes to you, you know. Or Mrs. Arif, my friend has twisted their ankle. Can you please call my parents? You know, just simple little examples. Or like if they feel unsafe, they're at the mall, you know, there's tips in here on like, this is who you need to look for. Who's a safe person? You know, go to a mom with a child. They're most likely not threatening, and they will most likely help you than going to a man who's walking around by themselves, you know, which is sad to have to say that, but it's the truth. Because most crimes and bad things in the world are committed by men. Not to say, you know, stay away completely from them, but as a child, you have to teach them some skills to be a little safer.
Right.
And
Discernment.
Yeah, exactly. And also teaching them to not ignore their gut instinct, what that
Mm.
physically feels like and what that emotionally feels like, and what to do, and to not care if they happen to be wrong of that instinct. If they're a stranger, it doesn't matter. You'll probably never see them again. If there's somebody that you know, they'll understand. And if they're mad at you, eventually you're going to make up and they're going to get over it if they really love you. So,
Right. If you can be in a healthy relationship
uh-huh,
and communicate and all of that instead of it be coercive and threatening, and
right.
that
Hmm.
is so huge, that intuition piece. Most of us did lose sight of that. We did lose track of that because of that outside authority figure shutting us down, or that bully, or that, whoever. And I think a majority of adults are probably running around not listening to their gut instincts either.
Yeah. Hmm. And you know, the other problem is also like finding the words to articulate what exactly happened. For example, I remember as I was being bullied, it was so subtle. Like there's certain little nuances and stuff, and I just felt like, ugh, I couldn't explain it. And I realized some of them were backhanded compliments. So I added that in the book, like all these vocabulary words. Like, what is a backhanded compliment? What is sarcasm? Because that's usually how bullying comes in, right? What is belittling someone? What does that
Mhm.
look like? What is gaslighting? You know, what is subtle hints? You know, explain that to children as young as possible, because a lot of people say, oh, those are big words, my baby will never understand. Probably not. But if you're smart, if you find a way to break it down to their level, you will be able to teach them that. And as
Absolutely.
they get older, of course, you start developing that word until they can actually articulate it. Oh yeah, I was being gaslit, or I heard somebody. Oh look, that was Loki gaslighting his brother, saying that no, that did not happen, but we all saw it. you know, Loki's like a master. It's like, what is manipulation? you know.
Yes.
So imagine you have a child that doesn't know how to express any of these actions with the correct words, and then they come to you and they say, I've been bullied. And the first thing you say, well, why didn't you say anything?
Mm.
That's terrible
Yeah,
because,
they're saying something right now.
yeah,
Listen.
uh-huh, right. Or how long has this been happening? How come you didn't tell me before? And everybody has this good nature in them of believing that the person who did something to you maybe didn't mean it at first.
Mhm.
And then you give them chance and chance. And then, after a while, you're like, okay. Sometimes it takes a long time because we're just innately like built to believe everybody's like us. They're nice. They wouldn't do that to
Right.
us. Unfortunately, that's not the case. But when you're an innocent child, that's why people take advantage of them, right?
Right.
They abuse them in that way. So I have all sorts of prompts, and I have a blog too at dalitalks.com, and I have examples. And I'm trying to push out more and more examples. Like earlier, I read out a few boundary statements because as I'm reading case after case that comes out every week about bullying, I'm thinking, what else can I give them that is very clear and concise for parents to be able to practice with their children? Because
Mhm.
with the younger ones, you can role play, it'll be fun. Older ones, not so much. They're like, ugh, this is,
Ugh.
I'm too old for this. I'm not a little kid. Like practicing affirmations. One of the things that I did for my kids when they were like ninth and 10th grade, and they hated me. Well, the older one, she hated me for it because she thought it was so ugh. You know, I put a whole bunch of sticky notes with affirmations on the front door, so that before they had to walk out to get the on the school bus, they had to read one out. And let me tell you, this child was so reluctant. She would not read one out, and they were so short. The other one, she was like, "Oh, that's cool," you know. And so it was so simple, but then she would do other things that took longer, and I would always like, I don't get you, but whatever. Um, so you just have to find ways that your children will be receptive. The other thing that I stopped doing because I was doing some self awareness, and boy, let me tell you, I've read so many articles on self awareness, and they're all pretty much saying like the majority of people think they're very self aware when in reality it is less than 15% of the population.
Mhm.
So we're all walking around thinking we're the shit, and we're not. Like, you know, we're like, you're not that self-aware, Mister, Miss.
Yes. We
So
have to be willing to maybe
admit it.
consider that we could be part of that percent that's not.
Yes, yes,
That's part of
yes.
the journey.
Right. So, and the hard thing for me, like, I have this conversation often with a friend, and I'm like, but okay, so like, if you think you're aware, how do you really know that you're aware? Because it's you and your own thoughts. So,
Awareness comes down to, are you repeating the same patterns that keep you stuck and feeling really blah and down and depressed
right.
and anxious? Because that's, what I love that you've really brought home in this conversation is just how much of our willingness to deal with abuse stems back to what we experienced in these
Mhm.
microaggressions when we were kids, these like
Yeah.
moments of just like mean things that our brains didn't know how to handle. And we probably didn't have a caregiver that could
Mhm.
navigate that gently and properly with us. They probably did their best in
Mhm.
most cases. And in some cases, were downright the person perpetuating the violence to begin with.
Yeah.
And then we get into these adult relationships, and it's so normal. The
Mhm.
little, the
Yeah.
comments, the
Yeah.
the little verbal aggressions, the passive
Mhm.
aggressiveness. We're just like, "Oh, yeah, that's just what relationships look like."
Right. Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah. And there's so many little things that we do within families. I know in Latin culture, whatever you lack ends up being your nickname. So,
mm,
for example, or whatever you have too much of. For example, um, one of my siblings was a chubby baby. So her nickname was Gordita, chubby. Like if you're too short, then your nickname might be, hey, too short, you know? So, or like if you have a big head, it's like, hey, big head. And so everybody's like, oh, forget about it. It's just a term of endearment. But after years of hearing that, it kind of gets into your core. And sometimes what you are called by a lot of people over the years becomes your identity. So if you're
Mhm.
saying, like, oh, even the way that you introduce a family member, like, for example, parents, how they talk about their children. If I'm saying, I have I have two children. So let's assume that I'm saying, like, oh my gosh, this one's such a problem child. I don't know what happened, but she's always giving me a headache. She's always doing this and that and that. And then my other one, oh, she's an angel. She's got straight A's. She doesn't give me problems. And they're both hearing this.
Mhm.
I have just created huge problems. I am telling them who they are. I am also created competition
Yep.
between them, and I'm creating resentment. And they're losing respect for me because I am saying these horrible things about them, or about one of them, um,
Right.
to other people. Even the child who hears the positive things of herself but not of the sibling might be like, wow, that's really messed up. My mom is saying this stuff about my sister. And it might
Mhm.
be true, but the point is, you're saying it. Like, you're making it concrete.
Right.
Hmm.
And then those kinds of comments, those judgments, even the quote unquote positive ones, can have a ripple effect of, well, now that is my identity. And if I don't get the straight A's and I'm not the perfect child, and I really let mom or dad know how much I'm struggling at school,
Hmm. Yeah.
and so it's, how do we meet, not just our children, but our loved ones, our community members, with compassion? And how do we stand up for ourselves when someone does bump against an edge? Like, at the simplest level, how do we stand up for ourselves?
Um, okay, I'm thinking of so many examples.
Yeah.
Like,
I can see the downloads
yeah,
coming
yeah,
in, like, oh,
yeah.
that.
Right. Like, if somebody says something negative about my character, I mean, the first thing I would say to somebody to repeat or to answer is, it's like, you're entitled to your opinion, but you don't really know me, you know? And it hurts to hear stuff like that. But I like to tell people, respond with something neutral or something positive, because the moment you start giving them the reaction that they're looking for, they have
Mhm.
won, and you have you have handed over your power and your positive energy, and they don't deserve that.
Yeah.
So there's so many different ways that you can respond, and I have some examples in the book, by the way. um and it all depends on the situation and the severity of it. There are
Mhm.
situations where you can just look at somebody and then look at them from head to toe and then walk away. That says a lot. Sometimes you can just say, yeah, okay. And or sometimes you can say, are you having a bad day, because I didn't think you were this mean, or something like that. Like, it's like,
That's
do
a
you
good
need a
one.
hug? Yeah, it's like, do you need a hug? It throws them off because they're not expecting it. um and then, of course, there are the spicy comebacks, but I don't give examples of those, because it just depends on who you are, who the bully is, and what you know of them. Because if you say something spicy to a bully that is not able to control themselves and they'll attack you, then that's really bad. But if
Right.
anything, if you're going to say something, you always respond to the action, not the person. And what I mean by that is, like, so if Safriana just called me dumb, and or like, let's say you just called me dumb, and then witnesses it, the witness says, hey, we don't call people dumb here. They'll say that to you. So they're not saying, hey, you're being horrible, we don't call people dumb. The moment you start attacking the person, it can become a lot more hostile. Like, if I call my friend ugly because of what they're wearing, then somebody might stand up for that person and say, hey, we don't judge here, so you can leave if you want, but we don't do that here.
Mhm.
So those are the type of responses you can, come up with. It's always about the action. And I know that that's really hard for kids to separate. Just like I always tell them, as an adult now, finally at 46, I have learned that when somebody is being really horrible to me, it's really not about me. It's
Mhm.
because there is something within them that they don't like or that they hate, that they're hurting, and they want to project that pain, because behind anger is always pain,
Right.
always. So they're just projecting it, they're trying to get it out. And I just
Yeah.
happen to be the person available to receive that.
Yeah.
And it sucks, it still hurts. But deep down, I'm like, okay, this is really not about me. This person is just going through something. And sometimes you'll know what it is because you might know that person. So if we start reminding our children that that is really what it comes down to, then maybe they'll be able to better cope. And I think it's very possible. I have met some great kids that are very confident, and the confidence can be built up not just with affirmations or by watching you be a great role model about that, but through sports.
Mhm.
They're going to learn a lot of stuff through art, through so many different activities, even through household chores where you show them their value, where if you have a boy and a girl, give them equal chores, because you still have those households where boys do this, girls do that. And that does erode at that confidence. It
Mhm.
tells each one, I'm good for this and he's good for that.
Yep.
And that's so wrong. And a lot of
Mhm.
people think, well, if I don't do that, I'm going to take away from femininity or masculinity. And I'm like, no, no. If you think that you're doing that, then you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
So
You're
yeah,
you're I'll get on that soapbox. Your
yeah,
child is a unique being that cannot be put in a
yeah.
checkbox,
Hmm.
and there's so many places in the world that, people try to cram other people, whether children
Hmm.
or adults, into certain boxes, and that is bullying, plain and
It
simple.
is.
We get to
Mhm.
determine who we are.
Right. And the other thing too is sometimes we do our parenting based on the pressures we feel from society.
Yep.
It's horrible. Like,
Absolutely.
and when kids see us parenting them, or like scolding them, or just reacting to something, um, because they're afraid what their church leaders might think or the family might think, instead of just doing the right thing for them,
Mhm.
you lose that trust with that child. That child is not going to come to you when something happens. They're going to look for somebody else, because they'll know that you're always going to react according to what society wants to see and
I
wants to
mean, I'm playing this out on the adult macro level right
see.
now with who's
Mhm,
standing up and saying, it's not accept we don't disappear
mhm,
people here. We don't do
mhm,
that versus those who stay silent. And
mhm,
it's again these patterns of trauma, the
mhm.
patterns of generational wounds that play out and keep people thinking that the only way to be is to stay small.
Yeah.
And that is why we have to get this early. We need to educate kids. We need to,
Mhm,
whether we are parents ourselves or we are supporting others who are parents, to help bring this emotional intelligence and awareness forward. And
mhm,
each person has that capacity to demonstrate that self advocacy and that self love to hopefully keep influencing people around them. So, as we're coming to the end of our time today, is there anything else about this that you wanna make sure people know or consider when it
mhm.
comes to bullying in their own lives, the impact of this, or just what they can do to make a
Oh my gosh.
difference?
There's so much that just came to mind.
Share it all, please.
Know that the bully needs help too. A lot of people hate hearing that, but the bully needs help too, because if you don't help the bully's going to keep hurting people.
Yep.
And if your child was already hurt by that bully might hurt your child again. Uh, that child is somebody who's just hurting or has the wrong role models, you know. So they might just need somebody like you to help them. And when there are incidents of bullying, the rate of incarceration increases. It can go from 50 to, it can double or triple. Um, but sadly, it doubles with the victim. And a lot of people don't expect that,
Mm,
because it comes a point to where they just get fed up and they
yep.
become the victim. Um, a child that has no empathy is a dangerous person. We have one in the White House right now, and it's it's hard to convince somebody with no empathy that certain people need help or that you shouldn't hurt them a certain way.
Right.
So please teach kindness, teach some empathy, um, and always let them ask questions, even the uncomfortable ones, and just be that parent that says, you know what, this is uncomfortable, and I actually don't have the answer. Let me think about it and get back to you. Your kid is going to respect you so much more if you give that answer than no answer at all. And also, if you try to bullshit your way through, kids know. They
Yes,
know. Yeah.
they so do. They are so
Hmm.
smart.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they don't have the full awareness of how to navigate these things. And oh, oh my gosh, so much of what you just said is just so important. And I really want to, before we wrap, make sure that we just speak to the truth that there are populations that are often more impacted by
Definitely.
bullying.
Hmm.
And, would you just give
Yeah.
us those
Yeah.
pieces, because this is such an important awareness. Surprise, it's not white boys and men with the
So,
highest rate
yeah.
of
Hmm.
bullying, though they are the perpetuators often.
Hmm.
As you said, right? We see a
Hmm.
bully who,
Hmm.
you go read his biography, he was very bullied and
Hmm.
abused by his family. Like,
Hmm.
it's a very sad story.
Yeah, yeah, and it aligns with everything that the research shows. There was a research during the first Obama administration that was conducted by, I think it was Washington State University. They did a study of bullying in a very conservative voting area versus a liberal one, and they found that in the conservative voting area, the rate of bullying against LGBTQ plus kids, black and brown kids and girls tripled. And that's really sad. And it was so
Yeah.
bad that they found that in this area, even the teachers and staff contributed, didn't just watch and not do anything, which they did that as well, but they also contributed. So it is huge. Um, we need to protect our kids. Our kids are our future. They're going to be taking care of us and making decisions about us when we're really, really old and unable to fend for ourselves. so, so let's keep that in mind.
Yeah, I mean, I have very high hopes for the generations that are
Hmm.
coming up right now, for Gen Z and Alpha, and because they do have a level of emotional awareness that has not been seen before, but it's still way we are way behind on where we
Hmm.
could be when it comes to our general levels of compassion and human kindness.
Yeah.
So again, thank you for all that you do to bring these issues to the light and to help prepare parents, to support schools, organizations, to bring just light into these shadows. I
Yeah.
super appreciate it. And I appreciate everything that you shared today so much, even though it's heavy stuff.
It is. It is. But thank you so much for the opportunity. And we didn't even get to the whole advocating for kids through the school systems,
Oh my
but
gosh, that's
that's a
that's
that's a whole nother
season
conversation.
2. Let's come back.
Yeah.
Let's circle back around. But where can
Mhm.
people find your book? Because it's such a
Mhm.
valuable resource.
So unfortunately, I have it on Amazon, but you can also reach out
Same.
to
I'm an
me.
author. I
Yeah.
get you.
Like, I have some hard copies here at home and I can ship it. Just, know that shipping will be a little more expensive. But yeah, so those are the two places. You can reach out to me through dalitalks.com, or I am on social media at Dali Talks. on Instagram. Mainly on Instagram, really. I mean, I have a page on Facebook, but Instagram is my jam for now.
Hey, yeah,
For
everybody
now.
has their platform of choice, but some of them are questionable these
Yes,
days. So,
exactly.
yeah, well, please feel free to reach out to Dolly if you felt moved by anything she shared today. The book is an excellent resource, and she has a wonderful podcast talking about all kinds
Yeah.
of issues. So please, please, please go check her out if you feel called. And again, Dolly, thank you so much for being here. Until next time, my friends, this has been The Shadow Side. Bye for
Thank
now.
you. Bye.